town's deadly past is said to terrorize the living.
All of a sudden, it was like, bam, lightning, thunder.
When temperatures strike their lowest lows, residents are reminded of the witch's frigid murder.
I can't get out!
The revenge is still there, and to this day, Dyer is still angry.
An anger so fierce, it lives on in local legend, and a deadly curse that has continued to plague this small town for over 3 centuries. Leonardtown is a picturesque southern Maryland community with roots dating back hundreds of years. But underneath its quaint facade, some residents believe something dark lurks in the woods, the ghost of the witch Dyer.
You feel it. You see it. You sense it. You just sort of know. Peanut even acts strange at times when you can't see anything out there, but there's something out there. Dyer is definitely haunting the town, and she has an axe to grind.
Dyer's vengeance is so terrifying, her legend is often mistaken as the inspiration for the Blair Witch Project. Regardless, locals are convinced that their witch in the woods is as scary as any Hollywood movie.
Yeah, I think the Blair Witch Project certainly made Dyer kind of come to life a little bit in a way that people hadn't seen. Made it certainly more scarier to the people who had been telling the tale for a long time.
And Karen Stauffer, a lifelong Leonardtown resident, knows the fear behind the legend all too well.
Growing up, I've heard certain people talk about Dyer. The legend of Dyer is one of the most famous stories in town. She was a witch, and she lived back in the woods. I've heard them say the stream down there was haunted, that the whole woods was haunted. I'd always thought they were just folklore.
But 35 years ago, she learned differently when a bright, clear autumn day turned ugly and Karen came face to face with the legend of Dyer.
It was just a regular, lazy autumn day. When I was 18, driving around with 3 of my friends, just typical teens, you know, small town, not much to do. And I came up with the idea to go in the woods where Dyer lived. They all looked at me and said, no, you don't want to go there. The place is haunted, it's cursed. But I said, come on.
What can it hurt?
As I started to walk in the woods, I had this feeling that it just wasn't an ordinary woods. I felt that there was a presence there.
Hey, maybe we should go back.
Stop being a bunch of scaredy cats. Let's go.
My friends were adamant about leaving. They did not want to be there, but I really wanted to see something. Something was like drawing me there. As we were walking back through the woods, it just got real quiet. There was no birds singing, no crickets, nothing. Nothing was moving. I had this feeling that you get when you know something's about to happen. The wind just came up out of nowhere. And I mean, good 20-mile-an-hour wind. First thought that went through my mind was that was Dyer. She wanted us out of there. She didn't want us on her property. And all of a sudden it was like, bam! Lightning, thunder, and next thing you know, I heard someone say,
Let's get out of here!
I felt that there was somebody behind me. I felt a presence. I didn't see anyone, but I had the overwhelming feeling something was there. Once we got to the road again, there was no more wind, there was no more lightning, and there was no more thunder. Everything was normal.
Come on, guys, let's go.
At that point, I just knew all the stories were true, and I have not stepped foot back in those woods since. Nowhere near it.
Ghost stories are nothing new in Leonardtown, Maryland. Over 3 centuries old, the area is bound to have a few skeletons in the closet. And local historian Susan Erickson has studied them all.
Leonardtown has been around for centuries. In 1634, when the colonists came, very quickly they moved up into Leonardtown, and that was because the land itself was very fertile. During colonial times, tobacco was a cash crop, and so many immigrants came to start a plantation and make their way in the world.
If there is one thing colonists of the New World want, it is success, and Leonardtown delivers.
They were right on Breton Bay, so they could take their tobacco and put it right on ships and send it to England. People called Leonardtown a most convenient place.
Washington Post meteorologist Camden Walker can attest. It is a comfortable place as well.
There's a good amount of water surrounding Leonardtown, and the water helps keep it a little cooler on the hottest of summer days and warmer in the winter.
In Leonardtown, the weather is typically very beautiful and mild. We get snow maybe once or twice in a winter, but it's a beautiful place to live.
But over 300 years ago, conditions were very different. In the year 1697, the colonists were facing a winter so brutal, it seemed to defy explanation.
In 1697, the temperatures in southeastern Maryland were bottoming out in the single digits. It was a severe winter. The colonists were seeing much more snow, windier conditions, blizzard conditions. They were dealing with bitter cold.
Desperate for answers, residents wonder, could there be a witch in their midst?
Legends are people's ways of trying to explain things that they don't have an immediate answer for. And in times before meteorologists, the weather was extremely mysterious, and so the supernatural often becomes an explanation. And witches allow us to fear those marginal figures that don't fit society.
According to legend, Moll Dyer was an odd, eccentric old woman, no family, living in the woods by herself.
They decided that this woman was a witch and she was causing it. And so they took it upon themselves to get rid of the problem.
And it's the colonists' actions on a cold winter's night that will change Leonardtown forever.
People were terrified of what she would do to them. Revenge can be a very powerful desire.
Every town has its secrets, even quiet little Leonardtown, Maryland. And embedded in the deep, dark cracks of the town's history lies a story of witchcraft and murder so infamous, residents shiver at the name, Moll Dyer.
I'm not a believer in ghosts or witches per se, but, you know, I believe things can happen that are unexplained, and strange things have happened in Leonardtown.
As a lifelong resident, local journalist Jason Babcock knows all about Leonardtown's dark past.
Covering local history is definitely a passion of mine. I like to write about local ghost stories, and Moll Dyer is definitely the most popular one in Leonardtown.
But back in 1697, Moll Dyer is anything but popular.
According to the legend, there was no indication that Moll Dyer was a friendly woman. She was a lonely old spinster living in the middle of the woods. If you're strange and out of place in the late 1600s, the obvious answer is you're a witch.
And Maul Dyer's own actions seem to give the colonists more proof that she isn't just an old woman in the woods.
According to the legend, she had a knowledge of herbs for medicinal purposes. And of course, that kind of knowledge becomes suspect. To have a knowledge of healing that could be construed as witchcraft.
The idea of black magic in their tiny Christian community terrifies the good people of Leonardtown. So the colonists keep their distance, petrified to cross her path.
The story goes that during the good weather, she would gather up different herbs and trade them to people, and that people would give her money to keep her from cursing them because they were afraid of her.
I think those in the community who saw Moll Dyer shunned her and looked the other way. Though the colonists had their suspicions about her, they did let her exist among the community and did tolerate her for a time.
That is, until the year 1697, when a vicious winter turns deadly and the colonists' attention turns to the witch in the woods.
During an average Maryland winter, low temperatures should be in the 20s. But in 1697, the temperatures were much colder, often at the single digits or below zero, with the wind chill much lower than that.
Things had been going badly in the winter of 1697. It was so bad that it was recorded in the Council of Maryland proceedings, where it was called the longest winter we had ever known.
And few things are more dangerous to the vulnerable settlers than Mother Nature.
Colonists were very much at the mercy of weather back then. They had no idea what was coming tomorrow. The clouds might look like normal clouds, but then suddenly they would bring high winds, high rain, very extreme conditions without any warning. And with temperatures so low, almost any weather system would be snow and not rain.
When you have an extraordinarily hard winter, that means it's going to be problematic on their stores, firewood and food, and keeping their animals alive. They're looking around for what could be the cause and how could they control it.
But there's no controlling the uncontrollable, especially this winter, as a global weather phenomenon is unfolding.
In North America at the time, they were going through what was to later be called the Little Ice Age. It was a span of time, at least perhaps 200 years, where the global temperatures were much colder.
Today, scientists have a few theories as to what may have caused this period of cooling.
The Little Ice Age had a multitude of potential causes. One theory was that the sun was not outputting as much solar energy to warm the Earth, so that kept us a little bit cooler. Another theory is that the Earth's tilt was changing as it normally does every few thousand years. So it was situated such that the northern hemisphere was cooler.
And the result is a winter unlike any the settlers have ever seen.
Winters were so harsh that the colonists could see rivers freeze around them, snowstorms that were dumping a foot or two of snow. So you had your livestock freezing, your chickens freezing, your crops were frozen.
Not only did they have crops and cattle dying, these people in colonial times also experienced famine. And then, of course, that will go hand in hand with disease.
People are sick, hungry, and freezing. Colonists cling to the hope that they can survive the relentless winter. But according to the records at the county's Historical Society, many did not.
This graph is showing you that in St. Mary's County in 1697, there were more than twice the number of deaths than in the prior year and the following year. So it helps us to determine there was a cataclysmic event happening in that year.
Anytime there is historical evidence that's fairly reliable that is part of a legend, it's going to make that legend stronger. It's going to give it more credence. Strong historical connections provide that kind of evidence.
While the colonists fight for survival, one person seems oddly unscathed by the elements.
Moll Dyer was living on the outskirts of town by herself with no visible means of support, and she's surviving one of the harshest winters in known time.
Just to survive on your own would have been a challenge at that time. You needed a large family to work your farm just to feed yourselves. Moll Dyer didn't have that, so witchcraft would have been the only explanation on how she's getting by.
With the unusually brutal winter slowly wiping them out, the colonists need something to blame, or someone.
The townspeople eventually became convinced that all of their troubles lie at the foot of Moll Dyer. Her witchcraft has to be stopped now.
Weather was hard to explain and almost a bit more magical and mystical. For better, for worse, their outlet was superstition, and that was the only way they could figure out how to cope in these harsh conditions.
Whether she is cursing the townspeople with hardship or even controlling the weather, the colonists don't know or care. They decide the only way to fight the cold is with fire.
They were willing to do whatever it took to save their town, even if it meant murder.
Little do they know, their actions will have huge consequences. Consequences that will be felt for hundreds of years.
She made her dying wish curse on these people. That was to last for generations. The curse of Moll Dyer.
According to legend, 3 centuries ago, a witch lived in the woods just outside Leonardtown, Maryland. And today, some residents believe her ghost still haunts the land, craving vengeance for her untimely death.
I actually remember hearing she does kind of curse the area off Moll Dyer Road. In high school, a couple of people I knew went and took pictures, and there was actually fuzzy images in the trees.
I keep my distance from the Moll Dyer woods. I mean, there's a lot of stories surrounding it. People say that she still, wanders out there.
I first learned about the legend of Moll Dyer when I opened my bookstore about 11 years ago. There was a lot of talk about her seeking revenge on all the folks that put her to death all those years ago.
The legend of Moll Dyer, as it's told, has a group of people who are facing really dramatic, dire consequences of the weather and are struggling to stay alive. And yet they perceive this woman who, by all accounts, shouldn't be surviving as well as she is, and she's doing fine. And so they start thinking, this isn't just bad luck. Something's going on here. That person who has already been an outsider becomes a really easy target and becomes scapegoated for a lot of these kind of fears.
To be accused of witchcraft is not an exceptional thing to have happen in the late 17th century. Back then, witchcraft was against the law, and it was punishable by death.
Terrified of what else Moll Dyer might inflict on them, the people of Leonardtown decide to make themselves judge, jury, and executioners.
They're dealing with these terrible conditions that they had not seen before. And so the time had come to try to put a stop to their misery, and killing Moll Dyer and stopping her witchcraft might do that.
And so the legend goes. On the coldest night of the year, an angry mob descends on the old witch, eager to strike her down with the strong arm of vigilante justice.
Torches in hand, lit ablaze, they arrived at the hut of Moll Dyer.
She heard people coming to her house. She saw flames, and she didn't know what was going to happen to her.
This mob could have had her arrested, but they didn't care if Moll Dyer lived or died. They wanted her gone. The hut was engulfed in flames, and Moll Dyer was driven out.
Temperatures were likely near or below zero. Someone who was exposed to these conditions, who was forced to be outside for longer than 10 or 15 minutes, they would not fare well.
Forsaken and enraged, Moll Dyer watches from the nearby woods as her only shelter burns to the icy ground.
She has only the clothes on her back. She's out in the middle of the woods. It's dark. She has no one she can turn to. She was out of options, and so the story says that Mola Dyer put a curse on those who had driven her away.
She cursed all of the people in the village of Leonardtown that their land would not ever be productive and that their families would always suffer.
But Mola Dyer will suffer as well.
After Mola Dyer fled the hut, there was no sign of her. The men were relieved. The witch was gone. But they couldn't be more wrong.
Uttering her curse, Mola disappears into the night, but her story isn't over yet. It continues to plague the people of Leonardtown today. After being driven out of her home, the witch Mola Dyer swears a curse to forever claim her land and bring misery on anyone who crosses it. Today, many people in Leonardtown, Maryland believe the curse is still alive and dangerous.
Apparently, through the woods where Mola Dyer lived, there's still people that live around there, and they think that they still see her every so often. So you just never know. It is a little spooky.
The woods, yeah, I definitely get a sense that it was haunted, considering how quiet and how peaceful it is, but at the same time, there's the eeriness about it. I would definitely steer clear of the woods because you never know what could happen.
Around here, it's common knowledge to keep your distance from Mola Dyer's woods. It's an unspoken rule that has stood the test of time.
In the case of Mola Dyer, this is somebody who already is viewed by the community as having a connection to the supernatural. And so when her ghost returns, it's a natural assumption to think that that kind of power is going to be expanded exponentially in terms of the power to envelop the whole woods and to continue to exist in this area.
And no one knows this more than Leonardtown resident Kathy Lashley. Mola Dyer's land now belongs to her. And there's been a number of strange things that have happened since Kathy moved here 28 years ago.
This part of the run is Mola Dyer's escape route on that night that she was chased out of her cabin. She ran up this creek, and this is named after her, and it's called Mola Dyer Run. I look down the run and try to imagine her running up this creek and just being scared and frightened and angry.
Many people, including Kathy, believe that anger lives on today.
I've never really believed in ghosts, but some really horrific things have happened right in front of our house. You have to wonder, does it have anything to do with the curse of Mola Dyer?
Unexplained havoc plagues this land, and even on the clearest nights, the witch's ghost can cast a dark cloud.
I remember one night, my husband and I were asleep, and there was a loud knock at the door.
Hello? Hello? Look, there's been an accident. We need your help.
There was a young guy at the door.
Please.
He was very upset and very hysterical. I was just thinking someone might be killed.
Hurry!
When I walked up to the road, I could see the car had flipped over on its roof.
I'm stuck!
I could see the man hanging upside down by his seatbelt.
Please!
My husband went in the window and he tried to help him get the seatbelt released, which he couldn't. There was just too much pressure on it. It was very scary.
Please help me!
There was fuel on the road and I could smell the fumes from the gas. There were some people screaming, you know, it's gonna blow. The adrenaline was really rushing.
I can't get out!
The biggest fear was that the car would catch on fire and you would see people on fire in front of you and burned alive. The ambulance came and finally freed him by cutting the seatbelt, and then he was taken away in the ambulance.
The worst part is, it wasn't the first time accidents have occurred outside Kathy's door, and it won't be the last.
There's been many accidents right in front of the house, at least a dozen maybe. There's constantly mailboxes being knocked over. Many cars have run off the road in front of our house, and there's been 2 fatalities.
But all the more peculiar is the seemingly harmless stretch of road where these accidents occur.
It's not a dangerous road to travel on. It's a straight shot. There's no trees on the road. There's no obstacles. There's no stoplights. For an accident to happen there, it's just kind of unexplained. I personally wondered in the back of my mind, could it be something to do with Muldier? Maybe a lot of her anger still lingers in the area, and it's possible that we're seeing that in all these accidents. The curse has become part of our lives now.
Could this be the high cost of injustice done 300 years ago? Injustice that's only getting started on the night Maul Dyer is driven from her home. After turning her home to ashes, the colonists retreat back to the village in victory, while Maul Dyer retreats into the woods.
They apparently didn't have the nerve to kill her outright, but they essentially sentenced her to death by burning down her only shelter during this terrible winter. It was definitely brute force. It was definitely mob justice.
Muldier is by herself and during one of the worst nights, the coldest nights of the winter. The snow, the biting wind, and with only her rags to protect her.
It was during the Little Ice Age where winters were much more severe. When the air temperature and the wind chill are below -18 degrees, your core body temperature is going to drop and you're going to start feeling very numb. You have very little time to protect your core temperature from hypothermia. So it's safe to say if someone were left outdoors in the winter of 1697, it would not be long before they died from exposure.
With nothing but the rags on her back, Maul Dyer is doomed to suffer a horrific death.
More than likely, those people were relieved to be rid of Maul Dyer. No one knew what had occurred with her, whether she was alive or dead. They probably assumed she was dead.
But the settlers aren't rid of her just yet.
It was here in this general area around Muldier Road and Muldier Run that after a period of several days, the story says that a young boy was in these woods trying to round up some cattle that had gotten loose, and it was this young boy who discovered the body of Muldier. Muldier was found frozen solid, and the way that this young man had found her was she was kneeling on a very large rock with her left hand attached to the rock, right hand raised to the sky. And she was frozen in this position, according to the story.
Legend has it, Maul Dyer's anger and vengeance towards her murderers will literally be marked in stone forever.
When they pried her body from the rock, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It must have been quite a shock to see that there were imprints of both her hand and her knees on this rock.
According to legend, any suspicions the townspeople have that Maul Dyer is a witch are confirmed.
They thought she must have been a witch, because how else would a normal person leave their imprints in a huge rock like this? Must have been very frightening for these people.
And the witch Maul Dyer's hold on this small town is only now just taking shape.
They made the situation worse. Her last act was definitely vengeance.
Her legend will live on in the woods and the rock on which she died.
I felt like someone squeezing and I couldn't breathe. I said, I just touched that rock.
Every Sunday, a new tale of weather legend American Supernatural, Sunday nights at 10 on the Weather Channel.
The colonists of Leonardtown, Maryland, thought getting rid of the witch Moll Dyer would free them of winter's harsh grasp. But it isn't until her frozen body is discovered that they realize things are about to get much worse.
It had been several days since Moll Dyer was driven out of her home when she was found dead, frozen solid, kneeling on a very large rock.
In her final moments, the legend says that Moll Dyer swears to the heavens that she will get her revenge. An anger so ferocious, it is embedded in the rock on which she died.
Moll Dyer was so angry with these men that she vowed to get revenge by placing a curse of general suffering on these men and the generations to follow.
It's revenge that feels all too real to her persecutors and their families back then and even now.
There are descendants of the people who burned her house down that believe that their families were cursed and that curse affects them today.
For hundreds of years, the story of Moll Dyer is told and retold, passed down as local folklore.
In the immediate aftermath of Moll Dyer's death, I would say the people there definitely believed there was a curse put on them, because this story lasted for so long, handed down verbally.
But over the years, Moll Dyer's rock is lost. That is, until the 1970s, when a boulder believed to be the witch's final resting place is uncovered.
Back in the 1970s, there was a writer for the newspaper. And during one summer, he and his wife decided to see if they could find Moll Dyer rock. And he was able to find a farmer who said, "I remember as a boy that rock. I can show you where it is." The almost 900-pound rock was settled into the bank of a creek. It had been moved there when they were clearing fields for farming. And they could move it a little bit to see the handprint. They've eroded somewhat because it's been over 40 years since they've been there, but you can still see the faint image of a hand and a knee there.
As the only possible physical evidence of this famous legend, the rock is excavated and put on display near the courthouse as a reminder of Leonardtown's dark history.
It was brought to Leonardtown and turned face up so that you can see the hand imprint and the knee imprint.
The rock has been out in the environment since 1972. We get a lot of rain here, so any features on the rock, they're pretty much eroded by now.
Still, even now, many in Leonardtown believe they can make out the faint impression of Moll Dyer's hand. Nearly 300 years after she was pried from the rock, her curse remains carved in stone, and anyone who gets near it feels the lingering fury of the scorned witch.
There are people that believe that that rock is cursed, influenced by Moll Dyer's witchcraft. So many people have had experiences of nausea or dizziness when they are near the rock.
The real problems come, however, when the rock is touched. And Lynn Bonviri, a Leonardtown resident for nearly 30 years, knows this firsthand.
I'd always heard that if you touched the rock of Moll Dyer, bad things happened. Well, one day, my curiosity got the best of me.
And with one simple gesture, Lynn learns that the curse of Moll Dyer is very much alive.
I had been interested in the legend of Moll Dyer for quite a while, and I had decided to do some research to try to find out about the legend. So I visited the Historical Society frequently. And one day, after I was finished, my husband came to meet me, and we decided we would take a walk around Leonardtown. And our walk from the Historical Society goes right by the rock of Moll Dyer. I'd passed by that rock 100 times, and I'd never even thought about touching it. But this day was different. I looked at the indentations, and I just bent down and put my hands into the spots where Maul Dyer's hands had been on the rock.
Don't do that.
Old Maul will get you.
It's just a rock. Watch.
It felt cold, but nothing unusual.
See?
Nothing happened. I stood up, looked at my husband, and we just sort of shrugged and said, oh, well. It was about 30 seconds after I touched the rock that suddenly I started to feel strange.
Lynn's doubt is about to be replaced with fear as the legend of Maul Dyer's curse becomes a terrifying reality.
I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong.
"300 years after Maul Dyer's murder, many believe her vengeance lives on in the rock on which she froze to death. And resident Lynn Bonviri has seen enough to believe Maul's curse is real.
I'd always heard if anyone touched the rock, bad things happened. And I thought, well, maybe that was just coincidence. But then I touched it, and my luck changed immediately for the worse. It was about 30 seconds after I touched the rock that my chest felt very tight, and my lungs started to hurt, like a burning sensation. I felt like someone had their arms around me, squeezing, and I couldn't breathe. I continued coughing, and blood was coming out.
Are you all right?
My husband looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said,
I just touched that rock.
I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. It feels similar to what drowning must feel like. We were both thinking, when do we call 911? But I didn't want to go to the hospital. I just wanted to get away from that rock. This went on for 45 minutes, but it did eventually stop.
To this day, Lynn still isn't sure what exactly brought on the sudden attack, but she is certain of one thing.
There is negative energy associated with that rock. I maybe didn't quite believe it before that, but I am not going to go near it or touch it again. And I wouldn't recommend anybody else do it either.
No matter how many times the legend of Maul Dyer is told, the ending always remains the same. Ultimately, it was the harsh winter cold that took her life. And it's often during the most extreme weather that legends emerge from the wreckage.
The harsh winter in the Maul Dyer legend is an integral part of this legend, not only because the weather is the primary antagonist, it's a catalyst for the villagers becoming so anxious for some sort of an explanation that they go out and they burn her house and run her into the woods where she dies. But her death itself is because of exposure in the winter. So in both of those places, the weather is the central instigator for the legend, and then the hand that deals the fatal blow to Maul Dyer in the end.
Even today, tales like Maul Dyer's continue to grow and shine a light on our past.
The legend of Maul Dyer is this community's history and something that's unique to us here in Leonardtown.
I think the legend of Muldier is so important for the residents of Leonardtown today because it gives a value in some ways to the community. You know, there's this sort of long, deep history, and it's a troubled history. And so I think it also suggests a kind of an openness that says we're not going to try to bury, you know, sort of our past. We're going to embrace it. And in embracing it, we're actually going to address some pretty uncomfortable things, like how we treat people who are not one of us.
We have a road named after her. We have a stream named after her. It's a story told at nighttime to scare the children and to get them to go to bed and behave. So it's safe to say that's the most popular ghost story in Leonardtown.
And to many people, it's not just a story.
We will never probably know if Muldier existed or not, but certainly her story is very plausible. The way people treated her when they decided she was a witch, all of these things, they ring true.
And some people in Leonardtown can attest, Muldier not only existed back in the 1600s, but her ghost still lingers today.
There are people who have seen Muldier walking in those woods near where her cottage was reported to have been.
Some stories say that Muldier would come out to haunt the area on the coldest night of the year or during terrible storms.
It would be not surprising that a ghost would have an axe to grind, and that's why she is still here with us.
While there's a lot of controversy about whether she actually existed or not, there certainly seems to be a lot of evidence.
I think a lot of people around here still believe it to be true.
I think it could be true. I definitely think that it could have happened.
Oh, there still is a real Muldier. There always has been. There always will be.
Whether Muldier's curse exists or not, her death and ultimately her legend will be forever tied to this small town.